This is Sleeping in Trees, the audiobook, Chapter 48, Hurdler. I always liked Dork's father. He was a pilot in World War II, but, unlike my dad, he still flew for his living. He was usually somewhere in the air, often in the Orient or South America, moving cargo of all types. The other parents in the neighborhood liked Dork's father too. One could tell whenever there was a social gathering, people wanted to engage with this easygoing, affable man. His house was always neat as a pin. He liked things kept nice and in good working order. It must have been the precision of the pilot in him. Everything Dork ever had always worked well. Some things were old and very well used, like his lawnmower, but they all operated perfectly. In particular, I remember his jalousie kitchen door that opened into the garage. We must have passed through it 1,000 times over the years. It was the most magically balanced and smoothly operating door of any house in my neighborhood. One could open it wide, and with the slightest nudge, watch it slowly and steadily swing all the way from fully ajar to the most precise close, punctuated by a solid click assuring that all was secure. It was truly a beautiful mechanism, a glorious celebration of the brass hinge, the mass of solid wood, heavy glass, and just a few drops of 3-in-1 oil. As young boys, we never really got to know our friends' parents very well, but we could see that some had passions and others not so much. Dork's dad seemed to like palm trees. I can't say he liked landscaping, because I remember that Dork's yard was largely devoid of it. There was a hedge that ran along the side and down the backyard. A few plantings stretched along the back of the pool, and the front yard had some scrub pines. There was also a small tree to the left side of the walkway to the front door. It was greenish. It might have been an olive tree. That was about it. He must have liked palm trees because over time we all noticed that he was filling his backyard with them. All 3-foot-tall saplings in black plastic pots set in front of his long hedge. Every now and then he would add a few. Starting with just a couple, within a few years there were many, several rows deep. He was stockpiling the things. The purpose and plan was a mystery, and at age 13, neither Dork nor I could figure it out. Eventually, the puzzle was solved, and it wasn't that intriguing after all. Dork's dad planned to open a nursery when he parked his plane for the last time. He was just getting a head start on his palm tree inventory. One Saturday, Lobster, Dork, Cricket, and I were milling around Cricket's front yard. We had been doing some roof jumping. Here's how it worked. Walk the perimeter of a house, any house really. Locate a spongy piece of thick lawn below the eave that also ran several yards out into the main lawn. This was easily the most important aspect of the activity, as a soft landing zone was highly preferred. Look for a way to get a solid grip on the eave. Usually a well-connected downspout or low decorative wall would provide the boost we needed. With the eave in hand, we'd be dangling for a bit until we could do a classic chin-up onto the roof. Once completed, we'd sit for a few minutes to catch our breath. Getting from the ground to the top of a roof 10 feet up was something of a struggle, but we'd not rest too long, as the homeowner might hear some scraping sounds and come outside to hunt for the source. Dinkle, Dork, and I became quite proficient at roof jumping, since chin-ups were one of our most well-developed motor skills. With all the scrambling up trees and all the scaling of walls, we'd become Class A chin-uppers. During one session at Camp Cloudmont, I shocked all when I popped off 32 chin-ups from a standing start. Set a camp record. Now to the jumping part, which was the whole point, really. We learned fairly quickly that our trajectory was key. If we didn't jump outward at the right angle, we'd hit the ground with a sickening thud, the full force of the landing directed straight into our ankles. A few sprains were delivered up until we got the jumping technique refined. The key was to leap outward, so we struck the ground with enough momentum for a good tuck and roll. As we met the ground after a proper jump, the next step was to allow our legs to compress like skinny shock absorbers. For a split second, they would fold up fully. At that point, We'd tuck a shoulder, head, and roll. About 3/4 of the way through the process, we'd spring out our legs. This would launch us upright, and we'd canter out across the yard just like a small horse in a country field. Roof jumping was a classic Dingle invention. The recipe combined 3 parts danger, 2 parts excitement, and 1 part creativity, with a pinch of stupidity for added flavor. Roof jumping was one of the more challenging and entertaining activities on our rather long list. It didn't always go well. Sometimes we'd lose our nerve and have to climb back down. Embarrassing, and a heck of a lot harder than climbing up. This action was problematic on 2 fronts. A serious verbal shellacking by the rest of the jumper crew would be in order, often more painful than a poorly executed leap, and the odds of getting caught by the homeowner increased exponentially. One time, a roof jumper was pushed accidentally, resulting in a painful landing, butt first. Back to lazing around in Cricket's front yard. We watched his dad carry a shovel out of the garage. He stood in the front of the house, wearing his worn leather work gloves, and surveyed the area for a few minutes. He began to dig. It was a quick job at the start, but soon, as always when digging in South Florida, he hit coral rock. Back into the garage he went, and out he came with a pickaxe. Dork's dad began to hack away methodically at the stubborn coral rock. It yielded grudgingly, but he made progress nonetheless. He was sweating profusely. We sweated just watching him sweat. It did not help that it was early afternoon, and a blistering sun was blasting his work area and turning the front wall of the house into an 8-foot-tall oven brick. After an hour of hard labor, an impressive pit had been dug, 2 feet deep and just as wide. Dripping wet, Dork's dad grabbed the pick and headed back into the garage and inside the cool house for a break. Before long, he was back. This time he held a potted palm sapling, about 5 feet tall. Now we knew what he was about. A new palm tree was going in. He set the plastic pot down, strode back to the garage, and came back wheeling an old, well-used wheelbarrow, with a smaller shovel sticking out of the top of a pile of dirt. It was not the shovel he dug the hole with, but one for working in a garden. Dork's dad had all the tools. As he worked, we milled about, rolling in the grass in the shade, and watched the operation with great interest. He didn't seem to mind that he was doing all the work while we all watched idly nearby. I think he genuinely liked projects like this. He was also meticulous in all that he did, and probably had no interest in some young, smart-alecky kids mucking up his project. The operation continued. Next, he poured some kind of white powder into the hole and added several scoops of the dark dirt. He laid the palm tree over on its side and banged on the black plastic bucket with the butt of the shovel to loosen things up. Finally, with a single motion, he grabbed the base of the palm, yanked it up out of the pot, and dropped it into its new home. Within a few minutes, he had added more white powder and topped off the hole all around the sapling with fresh dirt and patted it firmly. Throughout the entire operation, he said almost nothing, only mumbling in response a few times from questions posed by the curious onlookers. Soon, he tossed the shovel and empty plastic pail into the empty wheelbarrow and rolled it back into the garage. He was back shortly and crawling into a small bush next to the front porch. He rustled around and then emerged with a hose spewing forth a heavy stream of water. We all just stood around while he soaked the palm sapling thoroughly at its base. While no one could have predicted it, including Dork's father, the final step in the operation became the little sapling's undoing, and in the end would spell disaster, securing its demise. He went back to the garage once more and returned with a toolbox. Inside was mostly all one needed to do just about anything short of rebuilding an automobile engine or servicing a locomotive. He rummaged a bit and soon pulled out an extension cord, a hand drill, a metal bit box, a box of screws, and some piano wire. None of us had any idea what he was up to, and by now knew he was not likely to tell us. We watched with intense interest. He crawled back into the little bush with the extension cord and back out again, obviously plugging it in to an electrical outlet none of us even knew was there. Next, he fitted the drill with a chunky concrete bit and tightened it firmly with a key. He then surveyed the area around the sapling and the adjacent concrete wall, took aim, and began to drill. It didn't take long before he had a nice, clean hole straight into the front wall of the house. He tapped in a lead anchor with a hammer and screwed in a long wood screw, leaving about a half an inch protruding. He wrapped a piece of old inner tube around the sapling and secured it with electrical tape. Pulling out the roll of piano wire, he measured a few lengths by stretching it twice across his chest. Snip, snip went the wire snips, and he was almost finished. He ran the wire through the tube and wrapped it securely around the sapling with a few turns, and did the same on the screw in the wall, making sure to tighten it all so the young tree was held straight up and secure against the South Florida breezes until it could take root and do the same on its own. Dork's father was finally finished and stood back with a great deal of pride. Bathed in perspiration, he admired his work as he walked around it and checked its straightness from all angles. He tweaked it a little and gave the wire another twist or two. Brushing his hands together a final time, he nodded to the crew, strode back into the garage, and disappeared into the house. What happened next has no reasonable explanation. As we stood looking on at the little palm, just beginning a new life out in the sunny front yard, Lobster started to trot away from us along the front of the house. He halted when he got to the end. He turned around and crouched down in a sprinter start. We all stared at him, trying to figure out what he could possibly be up to. He lowered his head. Ready, set, go. He launched out of his imaginary starting blocks and headed straight for us along the wall. He had become a high hurdler. The starting gun had sounded at the 1968 Olympics with a muffled pop, in his head at least, and he was racing at speed down the front straight to his first gate. The crowd roared and rose to their feet. I watched with a sense of amusement, excitement, and concern. Lobster was a mediocre athlete at best. He eventually could run like the wind, but at age 13, he was not very fast, and I had no feel for his proficiency in high hurdles. His technique and style left much to be desired. There was really nothing at all right about it. As he approached the gate, made of piano wire strung between the wall and sapling, he was on the wrong stride. His jumping foot was off step. The gate was way too high, far above regulations. He was going too fast, which would affect the height of his trajectory. We stood and watched, frozen in disbelief. He stutter-stepped, lost speed, and stumbled before jumping too soon. He could not have made a more bungled attempt to clear the first hurdle in his first Olympics. As he flew through the air, I had visions of Dork's father sitting down to a scotch on the rocks, full of pride in his afternoon of accomplishment. A small palm sapling was getting a new start and an opportunity to grow into a substantial, regal tree gracing the front of his home. Meanwhile, Lobster was careening through the air. He landed full force on the hurdle. The guide wire, expertly and most securely affixed to both the wall and sapling, provided a predictable result. The little palm was not only ripped from the ground in a brutal display, it was severed completely and irreparably in half. Before Lobster even stopped rolling after his most inelegant landing, Dork was racing into the house. Things got ugly very fast. Late that afternoon, a small posse headed from my house back to Dork's. His father led the way. Lobster came next, then my dad. Dork and I covered the rear, lest the prisoner attempt to escape. Within an hour, thankfully just as the broiling sun dropped below the scrub pines in Little Billy's yard across the street, a brand new young palm sapling was in the ground where the other only hours before had lost its life. As Lobster finished patting down the damp earth and reached for the hose, we all stood around and watched. Few words were spoken. It was my last bomb, and it couldn't have come soon enough. Up next is Chapter 49, and it's called Spirit in the Sky.